There have been quite a few adaptations of War of the Worlds, but not as many good film adaptations as you might think for such an innovative and influential book that's been around for so long, with few of them being any good at all. That might be because the story doesn't lend itself well to film or TV, or, and this is the more likely option, because properly portraying its sci-fi elements requires a blockbuster budget that limits the artistic freedom of the filmmakers trying to package it for a mainstream audience. Recently, in 2025, Ice Cube starred in his own version of the story that plenty of people have been tearing apart and mocking as one of the worst films of all time. I feel no need to add anything to that discussion, but it has inspired me to revisit, for its now 20th anniversary, the adaptation that most people probably know the story by, Steven Spielberg's War of the Worlds from 2005, starring Tom Cruise, a film that has a 42% audience score on Rotten Tomatoes and similarly mixed reception on IMDb and Letterboxd. But is it actually bad or mediocre, or does it just get dragged down by a few of the kind of creative decisions that irritate people? Well, within the first couple of minutes, before the film has properly started, we already have an example of just that.
No one would have believed in the early years of the 21st century.
Eerie music quietly lingering underneath the studio logos is promising, but that suspenseful atmosphere is interrupted by the voice of Morgan Freeman narrating an egregiously on-the-nose visual of zooming out from the microbes in a water droplet that becomes the Earth, expositing the creepy idea that the aliens have been watching us as we have been watching microbes, and of course hinting at the book's famous conclusion. The little suspense they had managed to build before being interrupted now clashes with a combo I can't help but view as the cozy introduction of a nature documentary. By 2005, Morgan Freeman was already well underway to making his voice synonymous with the omniscient wisdom of a nature documentary narrator. Having famously narrated The Shawshank Redemption a decade previously, appeared as God in the Jim Carrey comedy movie Bruce Almighty a couple of years previously, and the same year narrated March of the Penguins. But even if Freeman's voice weren't so famous, Spielberg opening his War of the Worlds like this, compared to the film it goes on to be, just doesn't work, and it's all the more jarring when the narration returns to deliver some final exposition right at the end. This is an experience Spielberg otherwise tries his hardest to make the viewer immersed in, and so it seems counterintuitive to remind them that they are watching an adaptation of an over 100-year-old book.
For neither do men live nor die in vain.
The book was one of the earliest and certainly the first famous depiction of a conflict between humanity and aliens. Whereas originally the story followed an Englishman surviving an attack on Edwardian Britain, adaptations often alter the time and location to better suit the real world at their times of release, so audiences can better relate to its dramatized theories on what an alien attack might look like. That the story could be successfully adapted first became apparent in a 1938 Halloween radio drama by the not yet legendary filmmaker Orson Welles, though the mass panic it was reported to have caused amongst its listeners, supposedly believing an alien invasion was truly underway, has been disputed.
That's fake news.
In 1953, Byron Haskin first brought the story to the silver screen, staying within America as the radio drama had done, but as opposed to the pre-World War II era of then, now the alien attack served as an allegory for the risk of nuclear Armageddon surrounding the Cold War. The film was as influential on sci-fi cinema and disaster movies as the book was for sci-fi literature, and its two leading stars, Gene Barry and Anne Robinson, were given cameos as the grandparents at the end of Spielberg's movie as an appreciation of how foundational those early sci-fi movies were on Spielberg's motivation to become a filmmaker. In 2019, a 3-episode BBC miniseries did faithfully adapt the Edwardian Britain setting, but was met with pretty poor reception and and I hadn't heard of its existence until researching this video, as I'm sure is the case with most other people going by the meager number of ratings, so clearly its impact is negligible. Whilst that may still leave a good period-faithful adaptation in limbo until someone else has another go in a decade or two, which I'm not sure if the Ice Cube version makes less or more likely, Spielberg's movie repaints the story to a post-9/11 America. Besides the mostly visual choices it makes and the atmosphere it creates as a reflection of America feeling vulnerable, our perspective of the invasion moving from Britain to America fits the book's intention of showing how even the world's most superpowered nation of the time is rendered helpless by the aliens' superior technology, much like the land colonialized by Britain, which the author H.G. Wells is believed to have been critiquing.
I think it was a philosopher/scientist. And there was a political climate that created enough anger in H.G. Wells that he was able to write this story in response to some of his frustration with British colonialism and other hot point issues of the day.
Whether Spielberg's movie is as self-aware of the potential double meaning of its invasion plot, a 9/11 allegory, and a critique of the war on terror that followed, well, it kind of seems like he walks a fine line between both possibilities to keep the project within reasonably patriotic boundaries suitable for a big American blockbuster that doesn't want to piss a bunch of people off, which is basically the story of Spielberg's career.
I mean, this film touches mostly on how this much catastrophe can bring about that much healing. But, you know, our world has gone through a lot of growing pains, and we're in a whole different mindset. So, for the most part, I think I made the picture because I thought that this story's time had come again.
After that Morgan Freeman narration, the film opens in New Jersey, where Tom Cruise is playing a character called Ray, finishing his shift as a crane operator and retrieving his kids from his ex-partner, played by Miranda Otto, who most of us will know from Lord of the Rings. Her real pregnancy at the time was worked into the character, and it actually works well to emphasize the distance between her new partner with whom she's having this baby, and Ray, who is, as far as we are led to believe from what little detail about his life we're given, comparatively stagnant, working this blue-collar job and occasionally being a lousy dad on weekends.
You know what your problem is? I can think of a couple of women be happy to tell you.
Just an arrogant asshole who peaked in high school and still strolls around with the kind of shallow overconfidence you might expect from this particular leather biker jacket and a vintage Ford Mustang. Not exactly looking down on others, but never admitting how much cooler he believes himself to be than an average Joe, whilst being the closest thing to an average Joe. It seems unfitting then that a movie star as big as Tom Cruise would be cast to play him. It's true that he doesn't quite squeeze into what is actually a pretty simple role, built to embody the dad fantasy central to a story about a working class everyman protecting his family during a disaster, but you can argue, and the writer does partly make this argument, that Cruise's prior roles in films like Risky Business, Top Gun, and Jerry Maguire bring in the perfect backstory to fit Ray's personality.
That's half what I got.
Though it was coming out at the height of his craziness, not just his association with Scientology, but the highly publicized antics orbiting his new relationship with Katie Holmes, culminating in that infamous Oprah Winfrey appearance where he jumps with laughing joy on the couch and uses force lightning. Otherwise enjoying working together, this new reputation soured the relationship between Cruise and Spielberg, who thought it affected the film's box office success and overshadowed its cultural impact, landing short of his previous alien-related work, Close Encounters of the Third Kind and E.T. Or perhaps Spielberg just didn't think Cruise's promotional behavior was appropriate given the allegorical significance of the film. Anyway, enough nonsense about Tom Cruise. If you at any point notice the cinematography in War of the Worlds, it'll be when Ray meets his ex, because that's when the abrasive style they went with is the most painfully obvious, specifically how it makes daylight, or really any bright light, look. You can't say it isn't a striking visual choice, and in that way it goes with the typical Spielbergian sweeping camera movements that often complement the spectacles of his blockbusters, but here I think it just goes too far for the relatively grounded story it's meant to be supporting. It's not an aesthetic Spielberg was unfamiliar with and trying out for the first time, but this is the instance where it works the least and feels the most dated. War of the Worlds at least has variety in its favour, spending much of the runtime in night scenes that fare much better for the grim apocalyptic tone. There's no need to fear that the whole film will be so visually off-putting because a biblically epic storm sitting ominously in the sky gets the ball rolling on what's really in store.
It's okay.
Want to go inside.
It's okay. Huh?
Want to go inside.
Rachel is played by Dakota Fanning, who was the premier child actor at the time, and whilst her delivery is beyond her years and she can give a convincing cry or scream when needed, which is a few times during the film, the character doesn't give her much to work with as this shallow mix between oddly perceptive 10-year-old
Not how you're going to get through to him.
and deer in headlights waiting to be rescued by Ray. Basically, instead of an actual character with development, she's a plot device to verbalise their family dynamic and for Ray to protect. Robbie isn't given that much more, and, as we'll get into, has an annoyingly abrupt enough shift in his arc to be widely considered the worst part of the film.
I want to see this. Wait, just stick around, Joseph, your sister. Please let me go. You need to let me go.
Without lingering too long on the storm and its coinciding lightning strikes that disable all electricity, Spielberg shows how masterful he's been at building suspense since Jaws, letting the ominous energy of the event arise naturally through the filmmaking, rather than trying too hard to make the audience shocked or amazed, and overshooting how much they should believe that shit is going down. Too much at once, and the suspense doesn't have any higher to slowly rise on the way to the next development, causing our attention to drift.
That is so weird.
What?
The wind is blowing toward the storm.
That is weird.
After failing to reassure Rachel that things are okay, Ray leaves her alone in the house to go investigate outside, bumping into Robbie after he ran back in a panic from having stolen Ray's car whilst he was asleep. All of the cars have stopped and a crowd is gathering at an intersection, which Ray pushes himself to the front of to witness the spots the lightning had struck over and over. Obnoxiously, he pockets a piece of freezing cold rock and wears an amusing smile as cracks crawl out across the road from the hole. He and everyone else continue to stand around with the survival instincts of blind, deaf toddlers as the ground quakes, a building crumbles, the road caves in, and a giant machine emerges that surely the average American in 2005 would instantly assume to be one of two things: aliens or terrorists.
Terrorists!
Either way, they'd be running away a lot further and faster than they do here. Besides the era it takes place in, this arrival of the aliens, their attacking machines referred to as tripods, is the biggest change in Spielberg's adaptation. In the book, the aliens explicitly descend from Mars, but that wouldn't do well now given how science has discredited the idea that there might be intelligent life lurking on or under Mars, and the idea of aliens flying down in a spaceship is a generic idea in general that would have been especially expected coming from Spielberg, since that is how the aliens in Close Encounters and E.T. arrived. Unlike those benevolent, child-friendly aliens, the tripods are a bit more antagonistic. So, to make the arrival more shocking and horrific, it was decided their home planet would remain unknown and they'd arrive through lightning, supposedly transported into organisms sitting in machines that had laid dormant under the earth for who knows how long. It might not make that much sense that they were never discovered underground, or that they waited this long to emerge until humanity had advanced explosive weaponry, which the aliens only survive because of their impenetrable shields, but a calculated effort to strike when there's plenty of humans to harvest feels more sinister than, for instance, a civilization of aliens desperately invading Earth because of something wrong with their home planet. Whereas airplanes and spaceships may have desensitized us to machines flying up and down the sky, certainly compared to when the book was written before the Wright brothers invented airplanes, the idea that something unknown and perhaps more ancient than humanity itself lies under our feet with the ability to annihilate everything everything we've built before we can even prepare to defend ourselves is more unsettling. And for the spectators showing awful survival instincts, it's a more confusing and ambiguous scenario than watching an alien spaceship land in the middle of the road. Maybe this was just a very concentrated earthquake coincidentally occurring in the exact spot lightning just struck over a dozen times. Not that that excuses why, after running around a corner, do they all shuffle back into the street to take a look at the tripod rising above the town, blaring a loud horn and making weapon whirring noises before zapping people out of existence. John Williams was composing for the film, because of course he was, and with the tripod, his music returns to give it a Godzilla-esque monster theme. This isn't a particularly good or even memorable Williams soundtrack, but it gets the job done maintaining an unsettling atmosphere and giving the tripods a threatening presence. The highlight being this sound that makes the dustification of the civilians so haunting. Unsurprisingly, at least once Tom Cruise starts running along with everyone else, this whole scene is one of the highlights of the film, and the 25 minutes it took to get here were well directed enough that it didn't feel like a boring struggle, as the first act setups of some films you already know the general structure of, like disaster and zombie films, can sometimes feel. The restriction of the ground level perspective accentuates the scale of the destruction, not absurd like a Roland Emmerich disaster movie, but still daunting. Buildings shot out behind Ray as he makes his way back home, and later more destruction as he and the kids drive away. It earned the film an Oscar nomination for visual effects, on top of sound mixing and sound editing, but it ended up losing all three to Peter Jackson's King Kong. When Ray reaches his house, he is understandably in shock, washing the ashy residue of the dead off himself in the film's most obvious reference to 9/11 footage, and taking a brief breather before going into protective dad mode to get them the hell out of there. Robbie is told to grab all the food from the cupboards and fridge, which we already know to be nearly bare, whilst Ray collects his gun. The detail of him slipping the gun into the back of his waistband instead of the more sensible option of his jacket pocket may look cool, but practically it seems ready to slide down his trouser leg or arse crack at any moment, if not just fall out onto the floor behind him. He leads them through the chaotic streets of other people fleeing to the local mechanic shop, where his friend Manny happens to be working on a car when the lightning struck that Ray hopes will now work, unlike everyone else's cars.
What? Come on, open the door, come on. Open the door, Ray!
More amusing than intended, Manny was apparently so absorbed in fixing this car that he is oblivious to why everyone is rushing around looking shell-shocked, why the cars stopped in the first place, why his mate Ray has brought his kids to steal the only working car, or why the tree behind him just caught fire. The road out of town is conveniently clear enough of all the broken down cars for Ray to speed through, the camera circling the car in an impressive one shot, as well as Rachel's screaming that she calms down from quickly enough that it feels like a shallow character trait.
Shut up, Rachel!
How you doing there, huh, girl? How's she doing? How you doing?
Distracting us from the exposition they squish in here of Ray explaining what he thinks happened. It's not unbelievable a 10-year-old would be screaming their head off, given the circumstances, but it does feel separate from how Rachel was at the beginning of the film, and that contrast isn't helped by how easily she cycles between screaming, calming down, and then leaning forward with excitement in her car seat as they approach the mum's house. It's hard to tell, but I might even be able to see her smiling in the car window reflection as she urges Ray to hurry. The lacking continuity and abrupt transitions between emotions might simply be a limitation in her child acting ability, but I think it more importantly speaks to how thinly she is written as a character. A girl who hours ago witnessed mass destruction of her dad's town, only to now behave as though nothing more extraordinary than the power going out had occurred. Although, Ray trying to keep things casual by making peanut butter sandwiches, only to be informed that neither of his kids want peanut butter sandwiches and one of them is allergic to peanuts, adds an impactful sliver of humour that reminds us of how out of his element Ray is in being a dad. This house, or rather this much richer area, still has power, but instead of watching the news on TV or listening to the radio, as would normally occur to exposit the state of the world in an invasion, disaster or zombie movie, they go to sleep in the basement. In the morning, the racket that disturbed and almost killed them in the night is revealed to have been a plane crashing on the neighbourhood, an impressive set piece of a real dismantled Boeing 747 that Ray is shocked to walk through.
Got some kind of shield around them. You can't see it, but everything we fire at them detonates too early before we can get close enough to cause any damage.
Spielberg and screenwriter David Coep deliberately avoided disaster movie cliches, among which were important people making plans over a map, the destruction of iconic landmarks, and news crews broadcasting live from scenes of destruction. Ray speaking to this news crew is the closest we get to that last one, and it comes across as a much more organic way of masking exposition than a character flicking through news channels, the dishevelled woman barely keeping her sanity in check with morbid journalistic humour.
You on that plane? That's too bad. It would have been a really great story.
It does, however, feel a bit like Ray has been hiding in the basement for weeks and emerged after the apocalypse was already well underway. But you can say that goes to show how dire the situation is, the aliens so effortlessly steamrolling humanity overnight. Since the mum and stepdad were staying with the grandparents in Boston instead of at their now destroyed home, Ray and the kids continue driving, his little road trip mission of trying to get them to a destination making me wonder what a Spielberg-directed version of The Last of Us would have looked like, which seems like the kind of video game story he might have been open to adapting. Or the more contemporaneous comparison would be Children of Men, released 1 year later about a guy transporting a pregnant girl in a world collapsing due to a non-existent birth rate. A toilet stop means Rachel comes across perhaps the film's most R-rated and horror genre set piece of bodies floating down a river, and Robbie tries to join a military caravan on their way to fight the aliens after seeming excited at the idea when listening to the car radio.
If we had any balls, we go back there and find one of those things and kill it.
On its most surface level, this is a dumb teenage boy thinking war is cool, but through his and Ray's shouting match, it's clearly meant to be allegorical for wanting to get revenge on those who attacked the country, and in doing so maybe gets a bit too close to coming across as war on terror propaganda.
Catch up with these soldiers, look up with whoever else isn't dead, and we get back at them! We get back at them!
For the film, the problem is it comes out of nowhere. Him thinking about going into the military after finishing school being a part of his character setup could have made this sudden delusion that he can help fight the aliens more believable. If not the initial tripod attack, then Ray losing the car to a desperate mob is the best scene of the film, although it is initiated by the rather contrived way of Ray swerving to avoid a woman holding a baby in the middle of the crowd. They get swarmed, Ray shoots and loses his gun, loses the car, and then struggles to hold back tears as they retreat to the shelter of a diner. Important to remind us that this isn't action hero movie star Tom Cruise. This is a dad who just had a lifeline torn from his and his kids' hands, and now they have no choice but to join the slow crowd, moving exhausted and almost aimlessly away from wherever the aliens are rumored to be attacking.
Cool down, man. Robbie!
Scenes like this and the bodies floating down the river are Spielberg most explicitly distinguishing his alien invasion monster disaster movie from the crowd-pleasing spectacles Roland Emmerich and others were making. Independence Day might be cheesy and unabashedly patriotic enough to have half the world's population die in the same movie as this happening.
Welcome to Earth.
But that wouldn't work for War of the Worlds, and Spielberg in general exists on a higher tier of blockbuster filmmaking anyway. Defeat seems inevitable, and humanity's heroism and ability to help each other are fragile in the face of opportunities like a working car. They are queuing their way onto a ferry when Rachel, Ray and Robbie are, in that order, the first in the crowd to notice the trees ominously moving in the distance and then a tripod stomping over the hill in plain sight. During the ensuing rush to get onto the ferry, only Ray manages to find a path around the outside of the blockade, and we're, I think, supposed to care about him leaving behind this random woman and her family we were just introduced to when she recognized him in the crowd.
Cheryl?
Yeah. Oh my gosh.
She really should have been established earlier as an actual character, or, to bring back the Last of Us comparison, they could have been another family they met and travelled with for quite a while. If this were a mini-series, I'd imagine something like that would have been the case, since Ray, Rachel and Robbie don't, as they are, really have enough going on between them to last 4+ hours. As the ferry moves away in an attempt to save those already on board, Ray is proud to watch Robbie climb up and help over some of the stragglers, but the tripods aren't piloted by mindless killing machines, and this one targets the escaping ferry first to briefly give us Spielberg's smaller version of Titanic. Here, the film starts losing its way a bit in order to continue delivering blockbuster spectacles. In particular, this car filled with passengers plunging off the ferry and crashing directly into Ray and the kids, pushing them down into the water, a weight that is apparently neither fatal or incapacitating, and from which they manage to escape and swim to the surface. It's a pretty grim detail, passengers who are lucky enough to have what I assume was a working car, then being killed by the water that fills that car, but the combination of getting on the ferry, surviving the fall into the water, and then managing to swim away unnoticed, stretches the believability that Ray is just a regular guy without plot armor. That feeling actually continues most egregiously through Robbie, who undermines what the film might have been trying to say about joining a war by leaving Ray and Rachel to run into the middle of a battle, and then somehow returning alive and well in Boston at the end. Again, defying basic survival instincts, they and a bunch of other civilians run up a hill towards the battlefield, a battle we don't actually see, but which the military clearly loses. Ray's superhuman ears hear Robbie's whispered pleas to let him run to his death, and only lets him go because Rachel is about to be taken away by a concerned stranger.
Just listen to me. I need to be here. I want to see this.
Robbie isn't becoming a man or earning respect from Ray, he's just recklessly abandoning his family to go watch fireworks that should kill him and which he has no way of helping fight against. And despite the enormous explosion that lights up the hillside and the wasteland we later see this area to have turned into, he's already waiting, seemingly completely unharmed, for Ray and Rachel to arrive in Boston, as though running towards the aliens was the right choice all along, and Ray and Rachel would have been better off also hitching a ride with the military. It might be on brand for Spielberg's sentimental and relatively happy endings, but when the rest of the story is so grim, it falls more flat than usual, bringing into question whether this actually is war propaganda. And from the moment Robbie leaves, there isn't enough joint character development left between Ray and Rachel to keep the family drama going. Just because the original book concludes with the main character returning home to find his wife is still alive, despite the Martians having attacked the area, doesn't mean Robbie needs to be included in the family reunion in Boston. Frankly, if they really wanted to go full in without chickening out, Rachel should be the only one to make it to Boston. After Robbie doesn't explode on the other side of that hill, Ray and Rachel take refuge in Tim Robbins' crickety basement, right outside the scene of the battle, and from which they can still see the tripods roaming about, because staying in a basement totally worked out for them well before, and this one seems totally secure.
I have a daughter. Why did you bring us here?
To fight them together, right?
This rather lengthy sequence really drags the last third of the movie, basically boiling down to a couple of raptors in the kitchen stealth level type scenes, as Spielberg famously used in Jurassic Park, whilst Ray tries to keep a hold on the unhinged survivalist delusions of Tim Robbins, luring someone to his basement to help take the aliens by surprise from below like they did to humanity, culminating in Ray somehow managing to beat the significantly larger Tim Robbins to death after previously obviously failing to wrestle a shotgun out of his hands. They hide from a robotic tentacle scouting a basement because apparently the aliens don't have thermal vision or infrared sensors or anything more sophisticated than an eye on the end of a tentacle. It's a set piece for set piece sake, built off the flimsy logic that the group wouldn't be discovered moving around the basement as much as they do, let alone that the aliens would feel the basement is safe enough to exit their tripod to take a look at some human artifacts. Besides Robbie appearing alive at the end, the aliens appearing in person like this is the weakest point of the film, losing much of their mysteriousness, as if Spielberg hadn't learned from Jaws that minimizing the monster's appearances is more effective, and kind of just looking like less fearsome CGI baby versions of the aliens from Independence Day. The scene is only engaging in that it suggests the aliens, whilst radically different enough to be confused by a bicycle wheel, are still as curious as humans, investigating the homes of creatures they otherwise massacre indiscriminately, or, once a section of land has been invaded, using those captured as fuel to terraform the planet. We learn this to be the case when Ray and Rachel are found asleep in the basement because a tripod, whether it's the same or not is unclear, decides to have another look. Rachel screams and runs up and out and is nowhere to be seen when Ray comes across the blood-red remains of the landscape.
Rachel!
A tripod somehow sneaks up and chases Ray into seeking refuge inside a vehicle, so we get this great shot of Rachel now deciding to appear, standing there and getting captured. After the tripods start being shot down or falling down on their own, and Ray successfully delivers the payload to the grandparents' Boston home, Morgan Freeman's narration returns to bring us back to the microbes, which have saved humanity by making the aliens poorly. This is the book's incredibly famous ending that inevitably ruins how satisfying the ending of any adaptation that stays faithful to it is. The aliens aren't defeated through human ingenuity and heroism, but because they weren't vaccinated against Earth's tiniest creatures. Perhaps the only way the story could believably end with humanity surviving such a technologically superior attack, and inseparable from the book's themes on colonialism. But the Deus Ex Machina is all the more potent in the 21st century, when microbes aren't such a groundbreaking idea as in the 19th century, and the aliens overlooking such a variable in their invasion less excusable given their tripods might have existed on the planet for longer than humans. That the aliens are so advanced they have long forgotten the eradicated diseases of their own planet is too far-fetched for them to ignore such dangers of a planet they have been planning to invade. It might not be as stupid as the aliens from Signs dying because they're allergic to water, but the ending still only works by today's scientific standards and in the context of Spielberg's aliens in how it humbles humanity, who basically just got lucky, which seems more realistic and better fits the film's tone than the world's militaries converging in an Independence Day style counterattack. All that's left is the unsatisfying fade-out on Ray's character arc, which is basically that even the most disinterested of dads could still be decent at surviving an apocalypse with his family, including murdering Tim Robbins in a basement. His daughter is alive but severely traumatized, and his son is willing to call him dad now, I guess.
Hey, Dad.
With such a thin through line and flat conclusion, it's hard not to feel like the whole film was, ultimately and unsurprisingly, Tom Cruise experiencing disaster movie set pieces. But good on Spielberg and David Coep for half tricking us into anticipating something more prestigious from a blockbuster. There was an attempt to make something great, wrapping the book's themes around the post-9/11 atmosphere of the time, but clearly the film still had Spielbergian blockbuster expectations to meet. Not as grounded and realistic as Children of Men, and not as fully developed in its family drama as Bong Joon-ho's The Host, a fellow monster movie from South Korea. Spielberg has always had a successful commercial style to his filmmaking, he and George Lucas having had the biggest hands in reinventing what that means with Jaws and Star Wars in the late 70s. But artistically, that does still have its limitations, especially whilst also being limited by being a high-budget PG-13 sci-fi movie starring Tom Cruise. I think the highest praise it can be given is that it adapted the story well enough that another high-profile attempt hasn't been made. Obviously, a failed BBC miniseries and the accidental attention received by the Ice Cube movie don't count. Spielberg has another sci-fi movie due for 2026, and with a screenplay also written by David Coep, so maybe something interesting and mysterious there is waiting to emerge.
I believe that if any extraterrestrial civilization has journeyed all the way here, it's because of curiosity and science, and it's not about aggression.